And now, for another episode of Woo Weaves Eternity. I could never be an actor. I couldn't keep a straight face. I don't even think I could be a comedian. I'd laugh too much at the other comedians and roll around on the floor a lot. So it wouldn't be that entertaining. Anyway, though, so welcome to Perpetwooity. Another one of these guys. There is so much stuff happening. I've had to accelerate stuff, right? Because the Navy's doing things faster than I expected. The Navy's always been interesting that way, right? You can, as a military brat, you could make calculations on how fast the Army moved, how fast the Marines were going to get something done as an organization. I'm not talking in battles and that kind of thing. Although this, of course, flowed through to their performance there as well. But the Navy is always unexpected. You can't count on them having a very regular approach to things in terms of time. And so here they are, letting loose more stuff about UFOs only a year back. Now you notice the trend, of course, because, you're woo aficionados. And so we see that when they first started talking and when they first started releasing stuff a little while back, they were talking about something that was more distant in the past, 2007, ish. And then they release information about 2010. 2012-ish. Now they're releasing stuff, finally they're releasing stuff about just last year, right? Modern, recent time. Humans have a internalized, seemingly, according to my research, cross-culture. Culture does not seem to affect this, but we have a sort of like a clock calendar, like on your phone. And our calendar seems to extend out about 19 months. That was what I was able to determine with these propagation studies for language way back when I started doing my predictive linguistics research in the 90s. And 19 months at pretty much at a maximum. So we consider across cultures, it is fair to say that you could make and across languages, you could go ahead and make the statement that events within the last 19 months are considered to be recent. And you would find that as you translate that, there wouldn't be any objection to this concept of 19 months as being recent. Now, if we put in 24 months, you would find many cultures that would say, yeah, because they're going to translate that in their minds to 2 years. And once you bring in the larger denominant there, the years, their mental perception of the time changes. So I'll have to see about doing something about the light. There we go. Now it's going to be cold though, but anyway. So about 19 months is recent. And so here we are getting information out of the Navy about the triangular, or pyramidical, probably actually, according to what I'm seeing, they're tetrahedrons. They're not truly like a five-sided pyramid or something, right? So in any event, these were May of last year. And it's like, wow, now we're getting somewhere, right? Our time gaps are showing decreasing amounts. And so we can anticipate at some level internally within our language and within our concept of what's going on that the next release will be even closer to the ever-present now. This is an interesting observation of how they're doing this. And I was hip to this a while back. But I'd anticipated that we wouldn't get anything. They made a big jump, right? They made a big jump from the previous reporting to this recent flurry of UFO or of drones qualified as maybe tic-tac kind of things, and then recently the pyramidical UFOs. Those were both relatively recent to each other within a 19 months period of time relative to each other, and the most recent one was within a year of us. So this is accelerating, and so I can expect that it'll continue, and we're going to build to a crescendo here. Again, my thinking is sometime in early June. Now, there's a lot of people that are discounting the impact of this, and a lot of people even denying that it's real. They're saying it's just, bad Navy CGI, bad, what was that? The fake alien invasion, right? As part of the Illuminati and everything. But they don't understand how things are in the broader context of eternity. All right, so Wu weaves through eternity. The veins of Wu run through eternity, and people like humans ride those veins. And this gives them a particular perspective on things. And if you're watching this video, you've come across previously the concept of the Illuminati, the royals, the self-proclaimed elite, and their self-identified characteristics and how they separate from humanity. So we'll just keep that for a thought, okay? Here's a concept of how things work at a deep Wu level. So once upon a time, there was a species, and we could call this humans. And within this species, an individual is born. And so we call that individual. This individual lives, goes forward through time, and dies. Est mort. This individual, having died, goes into the metempsychoses. Metempsychosis. I'm going to have to, hang on. There we go. Come on. Sorry about that. This is a tiny little space, and I also do my experiments here so everything gets turned about every day. Okay, so humans as a species, once in time. Individual born into that species lives through time, passes through time, and dies. The consciousness of that individual goes forward through time, having come into life. And this species is within the materium. This is kind of like the stuff I talked to Ben about. This is just a different way of thinking about this. The metempsychosis is the mentition that you have between lives, okay? And so at this point, you're dead. So you're no longer in the materium. You're in that greater expanse that we call universe. Universe is the sum total of all human experience on both sides of the life-death barrier. That's this thing right here. The individual goes through this barrier. It's not pleasant. Arrives at a state of death and goes into the metempsychoses. The metempsychoses is that point in which the soul is distilled into intuition. It's not really distilled. Let's just say it's sort of like a melting or a fusion into intuition, all right? So this melting of the infusion is fusing all of your karma, all of your experience, and everything into intuition. Intuition is that part of knowing that does not require education. You just know it's true, and it turns out in reality it works out that way. All right, so the metempsychoses accompanies this period of time, right? There's no time there, so we're putting words in a place that they don't really belong. But in order to continue the narrative, I must use them mostly inappropriately. So you'll just have to sort of try and catch the idea, because that's not really all of the idea. So having passed into death, the brain, the thinking, the mentition goes off into the metempsychoses. And while the soul, a separate part, not conscious of itself, not conscious of anything other than its tasks and skills, but not conscious of I or anything like that, but uniquely bound to your mentition, your consciousness's mentition, right? So it is your soul and no one else's, and can be no one else's. It goes off and is melted down to become intuition. Now, every time you live multiple lives, every time this happens, the soul gains more and more and more and more and becomes denser and denser and denser and denser intuition that goes back in many, 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 many layers of intuition wrapped in intuition wrapped in intuition. Very much like an onion, that kind of a thing, right? Because with every life, this process happens, and all of the intuition of this life is added to the intuition that was crystallized at the beginning of the life, or at the end of your last life. And so it keeps accumulating. And so the soul is, in this sense, an accumulator of experience as you go forward for specific purposes. Anyway, though, mentition, you go into the metempsychoses. During this process, this is when the melting and the fusion and stuff of the soul goes on. This is why we have this understanding here of hell being fire, all right? So it's again cross-cultural. It relates, a lot of it relates to, but no, it really is cross-cultural, because it went into it predates Christianity, predates Zoroastrianism, predates Hinduism, Brahmanism. So anyway, then you go into, all right, after this part is done, or after it is mostly done, while you're in the metempsychoses, you are in your heaven, which is individual and personal and has no other beings in it but you. And you get this respite period there, and you go into what is known as your long sleep or long rest. And this is a preparatory state to rebirth. And so during the long rest, stuff happens with the soul to allow it to recharge at an energetic level, all right? Very much like a balloon having to be blown up very slowly because it's a very thick and has to grow very slowly kind of a balloon, very much like that. So the activities that are happening to the soul at a mechanistic level that are going on are coincident with your mentition, your consciousness being in a state of the long rest, where you've come through the mentition of life, where you've come through the metempsychoses of thinking about and regurgitating your life and everything you've done and everything that was done to you and all of the experiences and so on are examined through this process. Then you go into your heaven, and then you go into the long rest, okay? And so that's sort of a mechanistic way of thinking about these things. And we can think about all of this process here as being on the other side of the death barrier. If we wanted to create a set around it and label it, we could. We could label this whole thing here like this as, what happens after you're dead or something like that, okay? And you got to go through this process each and every time. It's sort of like a subroutine when you're programming. Now, here's the thing. At some point, so at some point, after the long rest in the preparatory process, the soul and the long rest are completed, and you go back to get reborn in the species again. And then you come out and you're born and you're an individual within the species. Now, so in the normal course of things, we see that there are design patterns in universe, very much binary. Universe is very much binary. Alive, dead, hot, cold, wet, dry. And all these kind of very crude examples permeate through all of complexity. And so if we see a process, and that process continues, and that process is replicated, then we can look for that process and extrapolate that that process might exist, and then go hunt for it and say, aha, it does exist. And this process is thus to be determined to be natural, a part of the natural functioning of things. So as the soul is an accumulator, it accumulates stuff that all of the karma, all of that kind of crud, all condensed down into intuition. We also find that there's an accumulation process that goes on throughout the mentition. So the soul grows and the consciousness grows. But the consciousness can't grow over here, can't grow on this side of the life-death barrier. It can only grow as a result of this process right there. All right, this is key later on. So as you are born and die, and this happens more and more, you get better at it. Your soul gets better at it, it gets easier at it, your karma is shed, you live lives that are less intense or whatever, however it manifests that way. But along the way, your consciousness becomes such that here in this reality, in the materium, we flip it and we say these are old souls. They're really old consciousnesses, right? They're people that have been here so many times that they're just like mellow about it. Mahalo, with respect. Let's go surfing, that kind of thing, right? They're not taking it too seriously. There's various names for kind of people like this all over the place. They're frequently seen as spiritual. I hate that term. They're frequently seen as leaders in like Japanese, it's sansei, and in Hindi, it's rishi, the king thinker, the sage, the wise man, that kind of thing, right? Okay, so this is an accumulation. So this is an accumulation process going through this binary state. So back and forth, accumulation. Very much like magnetism, very much like how the materium itself is constructed. These same metaphors, these same design patterns run through everything. And you can approach almost any problem and examine it. If you get it down to the point where you're seeing an oscillation, you're deep enough to be able to start constructing a solution if you back yourself out, because this oscillation aspect is key to everything in here. So in order to accumulate, you must oscillate between life and death. Over here there is change, but you cannot internalize the change until you're over in the place of permanence, where your permanence can be where it can be integrated into the thing that is permanent in you. There is no change over here. You don't have a body, you don't have sensation, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So this is called the realm of change, that's called the realm of permanence. If you want to get into the languages that other people in this realm have labeled this whole process. So you come on over, you get born. You get born again, you get born again, you get born again, you get born again, and ad infinitum. And I'm saying infinitum with seriousness, because this is woo weaves eternity, all right? And so as you accumulate wisdom, there arrives a point at which, in the process of becoming individuated, you start understanding that process. You start seeing yourself having been individuated before in repeated cycles, and you start understanding that in this area here instead of over here where you usually grasp it. And so you start changing here. You start changing your behavior here because of this understanding, because of the woo of it all. You've gotten into the wooble, mahalo, the wooble. So you grasp it, right? You're getting wise. You're catching on. It's perpetuity. And you got to understand where you are in the cycle and where you are in the cycle of everything, because it's all cycles, and all cycles come down to, in order to create a wave, that you need that wobble, the oscillation, the wascillation. It's really a wooscillation. So now here's what happens. Some people, they become the sanseis, the sannyasins, the rishi. They understand this. Sometimes they grasp it in a life, they grasp it only in the body level. Sometimes they only see it in this part of the individuation. Sometimes they're able to see the whole thing. It depends life to life to life to life. Some people, however, for the necessity of universe, we'll leave it at that. Some people come into their individuation and they get this idea, all right? And so they get the idea here. We're just going to expand this, take the materium out a bit. And so they come on out and they individuate and they say, I understand. I grasp this. They get the wooble. They think they have grasped the ultimate secret of reality and universe because of them, because of their specialness, because of their I-ness. They think, I grasp this. No one before me, no one after me that I shall not tell will ever grasp this. I am great. That sort of shit, right? And so, but what they're doing is they're reacting to the wobble. They're seeing the oscillation. They're feeling it. They're understanding. They're getting wise. They're half wise because their view does not extend to the whole process. So it's only seeing it in this half, and it gets stuck on that part of the consciousness that has personality in it within the materium. Bear in mind, the materium is like a drug. Sensation is like a drug. It's terrible. Sensation in your mouth, sensation in smelling, sensation in hormones, sensation in sight, color, all of these things. When you come out of this area over here where there is no sensation, you're desperate and you swim in this environment. It overwhelms you. It can take over anything in the way of mentition you bring in, and you go through this process and you come into this body and you basically are just overwhelmed and you just go with it because you do not grasp. Everything that was before is flushed out in the input of sensation. And so these people, they don't get 100% flushed out, but they're still trapped in the sensation because they think it's I, it relates to me in this environment now and ever before, ever after. I'll always grasp this from this point on, and so on. And they're correct about that aspect of it, but they're not correct about the aspect of it being related to their I-ness. So now, another thought arises to both of these individuals. Are there others? Are there other I's, other individuals who are in the wooble, who understand it, who can see it? And so we write, we communicate through history, trying to find the other minds that see what we see. The other minds that are trained in the vision of being able to see through the fog and discern what's out there. And yes, there are. It's inevitable. It's a part of universe. Not only does the individual accumulate, but universe accumulates the individuals. So the metaphor works at all levels. You know, as in the minutia, so shall it be in the macro. The eyes, those that really are into that are partway there, that are still trapped in the sensation, think that they control the process. And they gather around themselves others that are also in this understanding. And so we have this group that forms. These people come out of the mass of humans. And their goals are not linked or captured by sensation and I-ness the way that this group is. And so these people go about their business, basically. These guys over here, they see things. One of the things that they see is, in this big I-ness, this big pumping of I see my wobble, I see my wooble through time, I see how great I am growing over time, becoming greater and wiser over time, living life after life, accumulating intuition, going through the process. I see myself there. And also, oh, by the way, these others are sort of also there. They never really respect each other, by the way, in this group. This group over here, they start forming up. They call themselves the elite. They separate themselves from the mass of humanity. Well, so time passes, shit happens, eternity is long, wars are long, wounds are perpetual and perpetual. And we've come to a situation where the elite become stratified. They become convinced of their own separation, convinced of their own eliteness, and they get the idea that they don't need humanity anymore because they long time ago, through studying the Wooble, as do the other guys, they determined that there's mechanistic or technical things. They can hack it, all right? You can hack the Wooble. And so this is what they set about doing. And through time, some of their hackery works and some doesn't. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. There's a bit of woo within it as to why it works and why it fails. And so this is the way of the eternal progression forward. And we find our elite in this now having become concentrated into a particular kind of a technology. And this is a true technology because the technology is real, and the technology is really bizarre. And this technology is what we see attributed to, like the Illuminati, the formation of these secret societies, because all of the secret societies are all based on the Wooble, right? Do you see yourself advancing through time? Can you see yourself in past lives? All of these kind of things. And so the secret societies are set up in humanity to try and collect as many of these guys as possible to convert them over to the dark side of the force, so to speak, right? And so all of this structure forms within humanity as we have the naturals versus the structureds, the I guys. These guys here have this idea, and it works sometimes, that it's possible, and by guys, I mean, as far as I know, it's only from the masculine side, that it's possible to reincarnate without going through a lot of this. And there's a technology that they've used. It has a tendency, this is why the bloodlines, this is why they all, as part of this technology that they use, they become reincarnated within the same bloodline to concentrate power, to concentrate wealth. Why should you give up all you've worked for in this life just because you're going to be a newbie in a new life? So they don't accept the idea that the naturals have, that cleansing process, that newness process, Zen mind equals beginner's mind. These guys over here, they don't accept that. They think they can hack nature itself because they figured out a way to hack part of this process. And the hacking has consequences itself because it changes who they are at a very deep level. Not only do they don't have the cleansing, they also lose the long rest. What they end up doing is they reincarnate within their own lineage. And so it's long and complicated, and I won't go into the details of it, but if you wanted to learn some of the details of this kind of thing, it was written into, it was woven through the narrative of a book written by Norman Mailer called Ancient Evenings, in which this Egyptian wizard, or priest, because there's no difference, this sorcerer, who had done this many times, he, as an old man, gets a young woman pregnant and dies in the process and transfers both his consciousness and his soul to what will become the fetus. A very difficult process because you have to hold your consciousness in abeyance in this part up here while the soul bypasses this part right here. And the soul is transferred still within the the materium. You can read the book. And the book is simply a tale that Norman Mailer had come across. I won't go into the details of how I know this or how he had found out, although if you wanted to research, you could find out. If you wanted to research into his life, you could see who he talked to and how he learned about this process and why he said it in ancient Egypt. But it's known throughout the ancient world, all right? So it's known to the yogis, it's known to the Taoists, this kind of thing. And it has consequences, as I say. The consciousness loses the long rest and the soul loses intuition. But it's a way of avoiding hell, all right? Because, I won't go into it, but so they presumed, as in their eliteness, that they could, in perpetuity, maintain this structure here, and thus did not need the masses. As long as they had just enough humans to occasionally bring new blood into the elite. By new blood, I mean young women that had specific characteristics, who would be mated to old men who would impregnate them as they were dying after having practiced this particular kind of yoga for years. And I put yoga to it. It's a process. It's a technology. And so they would become. So they're basically both the lover and the mother of that individual guy, because they're going to bear him in this new life, and he bypasses a lot of that. The soul has to go through that, but for the period of 9 months here, and we don't know how long it is over here because there's no time sensation over there. But for that period of time, you're in your heaven. There it's reported that you're in this state of absolute glory and stuff, right? But without the counterbalancing of going into the hell and so on, you become, as we see, our own elites, very horrible, evil beings. So that's my opinion, that this process here corrupts the consciousness as well as the soul, and that it's not a good thing that one should seek. But these guys believe that it is, and they recruit out of humanity the unwise into the elite here, show them the wooble and how it works, and they participate in this process. And so we end up with, these vampiric, not even really energy suckers, they're life consumer sort of guys. Anyway, so that's the perpetuity. And these people here, the elites, when they get to this stage, by the way, they will also call themselves royals, because they are not like regular humans. They are somehow special. They are somehow not of the same body. Yet they can still die of the same diseases, still die of the same bacteria, still stink, etc. And so it's interesting, right? You'll notice that much of the touted stuff about the Illuminati and the elites and that sort of stuff, if you fit it into this framework, makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more sense as to what they're doing, because they figure that they've got to watch out. This is totally disproportionate, because the mass of humans is this entire wall and this entire building, and totally can subsume them, and they know this, and they're very much afraid of that. Because see, they can be wiped out, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. So once you begin this process of hacking reality, you don't know what's going to happen to you if you happen to get kicked back and have to go through and come out clean again in here. There's suppositions, people talk about it, there's speculation, but so far nobody's, there's not a consensus forming as to how that actually works out. If you end up getting bumped out of the game, so to speak, because the royal family that you're in gets wiped out. But that's exactly what is done. All right. So the elites are not homogeneous, right? There's fractures that go through them, and some groups will attack other groups so that they can return and rule all of this mass of humanity from which power derives. And as I was going to say, the whole George Guidestones of whittling humanity down to a smaller amount comes from this idea that these people can just subsist without the randomness that is humanity, that is necessary to form the process by which consciousness can evolve, karma can be expressed, and we can grow. They think they can do it in isolation in a lab. They can just petri dish it, sandbox the whole thing, right? Some of these groups in here, as I say, the idea that you're going to whittle humanity down to 500 million, you may indeed do that, but it's not going to be good for these guys at all. They'll be wiped out in that process just because the 500 million will just say, hey, fuck it, all restraints are gone. Some people will rise out of there that are of this group. They'll take over part of this group and just wipe them out. Anyway, but right at the moment we have these where there's times where you have battles between these groups, between alliances within the group of the elites. And one such thing was when there were a group that we call the Cathars that were allied with and battled on the same side of the Knights Templar. And the French king at the time came along and killed the head of the Knights Templar and a lot of them, and killed them in a very horrible fashion, right? Because he was convinced that they were all these guys here, the Rishi. He was convinced that they were of the Rishi, of the sannyasins, of the awakened. And he wanted to, and they were his enemies, because he's over here. And so the Pope and the King of France, they decided to wipe out a bunch of these guys in this big push. Because it's a war from their perspective. From their perspective, it's a war. And so what they did was they burned these guys alive. They tortured them for a long time, and then they burned them alive. Because these guys are convinced that by burning these individuals, they can disrupt this process here and make that long rest incredibly long because of the huge amount of trauma of going through being burned alive. And the idea was, we don't want, on these guys' part, are saying we don't want these fellows here to cycle through and come back while we're still here. We want them to kick out an extra few thousand years so that, we'll have a few thousand years more to gain power, et cetera, and enjoy ourselves before having to do this battle through time stuff again. Anyway, and so, as I say, these people, I think, I know they're losing intuition and they're losing their long rest. The consequences of which we see within the changes within their consciousness, where they become basically absolute evil here on Earth, or here within the materium. The long-term consequences to them are unknown. But this is the nature of the perpetuity that we have at the moment. This episode of Wu weaves through eternity. Battles going on are just capped off because we just had a royal die today. And, so things are afoot. Things are happening here. Got to get moving. It's cold out here too. But, so I'll take this down. This is a discussion that sort of is tied into what I was talking about with Ben. It sort of ties into magnets too because of the oscillation, the wobble. Everything is, one thing and then it's the other. Throughout every level of everything in this materium and without, as far as I can tell. Okay. Anyway, so we have a whole lot of people that are convinced that the release of this information by the military is no big deal. I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong in a serious way because we're at a point now where we're living in a Potemkin village. For all the kids out there, a Potemkin village is like a set on a movie lot. It's all the front of the saloon and the general store and the sheriff's office and all of that. But there's no offices behind the sheriff's door or there's no real saloon there. It's all just a front. And so it's great, it looks good, it's clean, it's nice, you can see stuff through the windows, but it's all a put-up job. It's just to convince you that for the illusion of the movie that you're in a Wild West village. Or Potemkin's Russian village, his version of that. We're in one. That's the way the Biden pretendency is, right? They're doing everything, and it's only a little deep. It doesn't go in it. There's no reality behind it. This is an additional aspect of why I think that we're in for a very rude bash and a biff and a pow from the release of the information from the Navy and the military. I also think that they're doing this thing deliberately in a calculated manner, escalating the type of information and the disparity and shortening the period of time between each of the releases, knowing full well that the level of chatter is going to rise, the emotional tension won't dampen, and they'll be able to ride that onto the next one. So in a sense, it looks like they're building towards something. It feels like that, right? I don't know what. They're putting information out there about or rather, the information they are putting out has a preponderance of focus on the technology and its superior ability to ours. This is an interesting focus to have put in our faces as they do these releases. And the unspoken aspects of both the idea of it being a technology and there being and beings, you know, material beings walking around or oozing or sliming or whatever the hell they do, existing behind this technology is the idea that the military is trying to communicate at this point, I believe. It's yet another sign of this woo weaving through reality. So as we had with the elites and humanity, there's issues around our species, and someone appears to be, or someone, something, some guidance, or some otherwise hard to describe abstraction appears to be putting in place a series of optics that, to my mind, are forming a pattern that I believe is going to become a trend, and that I believe I could project an agenda from. And if I were to project that agenda now in a woo mind sort of thing, I would say that they're preparing us for the introduction in a much more solid way than we might imagine now of alien life, of space aliens, right? So, and they fear our reaction. Well, I don't know if fear is, they're wary. They're wary of the potential range of the ways in which we might react. And that's why I think they're doing it this way. And that's why I think it's kind of like, and this is interesting, of course, the Navy, okay, because they would see it this way. If you get out on a boat and you're out there on a little boat, and it's the same with a big boat, and it's even worse with a big boat in many regards. But you're out there in your little boat, and it's moving up and down. You got 2 or 3 foot chop. That's the kind of stuff you can get sick from, right? You're moving up 2 feet at a time, and that affects your visual acuity. So then, if you add in other stuff like moisture picked up off of the otherwise not too bad waters, and put up in a layer 8 or 10 feet deep, you've got this kind of like fog issue. That's not really fog, it's just little particulates of water that sort of floats up and floats down and condenses, just picked up by a little bit of wind that's causing that 2 foot of chop. Well, if you're on a boat, you're standing up on the prow of the boat as you're going up in this 2 foot chop, and you're 6 feet high, your horizon is 3 miles off. All right? If you get plus the height of the boat. So if you're sticking another 6 feet up off of the water, then you're looking six miles out. And if you get binoculars, binoculars may well have a range, if you're on land, of 30 or 40 or 50 miles or more with some acuity. But on the water, you've got a different issue. You're only looking, 6 to 10 miles out. Small range binoculars are good for that, but you have this other issue of the mind intruding into this because you're not sure of what you're seeing. The brain is trying to process the patterns that are coming into the eyes to make sense and present you with a complete image. Now the eyes are processing it and presenting you with an image, and then you get to this point where you say, wait a second, that makes no sense at all, right? What am I looking at? And so and this happens, you don't even have to be out on the water. It happens to us up here on the bluff all the time. So I live on a bluff that's approximately 155 feet high, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And so on good days, it's even worse, actually, to some extent. But I mean, good sunlight, good visibility, and you look out there and you say, what am I seeing? That's the weirdest looking boat I've ever seen in my life. And it might take you a good 30 seconds to a minute, maybe even longer, for your brain and your eyes to resolve the image of what you're seeing, to understand it's not a boat on the water you're seeing, it's a kite being flown by someone down on the beach that's out far enough from your vision, it looks like it's way the hell out on the water. Your brain or your eyes merge the two images because it has no depth perception between the kite up here and the ocean out there. Your brain thought that that strange shape was sitting out there on the water. And so I can't remember the Danish or the Swedish word for it, but the Vikings had this concept down. They understood the woo of optics, that you got to be sure that you're seeing what you're seeing, that you've got to think about this, that you've got to resolve this down and fit it into your framework before acting on it in many cases, because otherwise it can get you killed, especially as a Viking, right? You're sailing around and they were great sailors, blah, 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 but they were still at risk. So you need to train your mind and your eyes to see well and to think well about seeing, and to be able to give you some visual acuity. And so I think that's what the Navy is doing here. I think that's what they're doing with these twisty pyramid UFOs that are flashing and coming around and moving and so on, and this sort of thing. They're showing us what they are having to contend with, because they can't do anything about the UFOs, and this is going to become very apparent as we progress forward here. And that aspect of it, I think, is going to be perhaps a bigger shock to the normies than I might have anticipated. That we're fundamentally helpless. If these guys in the pyramids want to come down and harvest us, they can. So anyway, so this is your life. You were looking for a life when this one came along. An adventure is when shit doesn't go the way you expect, okay? Adventures are good. We think of adventures as cool. Frequently, there's a period of adventures, if you survive them, they're cool, right? But frequently in adventures, there's a period of time when they're not cool. That's when shit's not going the way you expect. And that's what lots and lots and lots of humans, especially within the Constitutional Republic of the USA, are feeling at the moment. You know, shit's not going the way they expected. Things are weird. We've got a Potemkin village we're trying to live in, and it doesn't feel right. You can't do things right. Nothing's meshing anymore. And I think that nothing meshing anymore is also part of all of the larger level of oscillations that are required for this period of time that we're in. And so I'm disturbed by it, I'm affected by it, I'm impacted by it, but I'm not taking it seriously, right? Because this too shall pass. And I'm looking forward to the next stuff that's coming along. So I'm trying to get a better handle and get ready with the surfboard. You're never reacting to the wave that's actually underneath you as you're getting ready to stand up. Every surfer will tell you this. You're really riding as you're processing, as you're in the process of paddling the board, you're getting ready to stand up and stuff. You will pass sometimes in multiple waves as you're getting ready to ride that particular one. So you're reacting to them, you're dealing with them, but the process of surfing is capturing that one wave that you want to ride. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, right? I'm sort of trying to surf my way on the waves that are coming towards us. I'm paying attention to the flow of the water underneath me and the pressure lifting and in the falling and so on, and anticipating the point where that really cool one's coming that I'm going to get up on and stand and surf and ride into the beach. Because we're at that point now. And the big wooble here, the woo weaving us eternity, participates in all of this because that metaphor affects where we're at now. That analogy and that design pattern, because it's all of those, and they're not mutually exclusive. But from the design pattern perspective, the oscillation is happening now. Some minds are trying to remain firmly fixed in there are no UFOs, it's not meaningful, it's not going to cause problems, and so on. It is that fixture that I worry about, because those must come unglued as our reality changes and UFOs are introduced. And so they won't be able to be fixed in that viewpoint anymore, except to their detriment. And perhaps, they'll become a danger to others. Sort of like, something in the road. They just stop in the road because all of a sudden it strikes them, as to what's going on. And somebody plows into them, that sort of thing. They could cause accidents. This is the kind of thing that I'm concerned about at the moment. I have a lot of information that I'm getting ready to go through the last of the little tiny bit of cleanup process to run the immediacy data to see out a little bit. It only goes 6 weeks with any accuracy, and I want to look out into May and early June. So I'll be doing that over this next week because I'm sort of hamstrung. So that's the end of our episode of Woo Weaves Eternity. And this is sort of into a bit of housekeeping. I'll be doing something on Patreon here fairly quick, maybe this coming week. I'll let everybody know. I'll post something on Twitter and or mention it in another video and put a link down in there. I've been waiting on getting hold of being able to get a contract with a logging contractor to develop this timberland management plan and a road plan and all this other stuff. All kinds of planning you got to do before you actually do this stuff. And then we're going to jump into doing it. So I'm sort of here for this next week, and I'm letting my back get better from the terrible amount of driving. Anyway, so I'll do that with Patreon this week or next. The idea is there, though, that for the Patreon is that I'll be doing those on the road, right? I want to make the time productive because it's 6 hours on the road each way to the property. Or each time I go to the property, 3 hours each way. And I just wanted to make that productive and use up that time. And I've done it before, and it's not that particularly dangerous. I don't drive that fast or anything. I'm not really that much of a risk. That's why it takes me so long. I'll go into the rest of this stuff in another video. This one's too long already. But that sets us up, that understanding of how the elite and the Illuminati and everybody is there and why they're there and why they do all this weird shit, and why things are the way they are from that particular perspective. If you understand that perspective a little bit better, then things sort of make sense, right? The rituals you'll see these guys do, that kind of thing, you can understand. You won't understand the details, but you will understand in seeing those details that they are performing a ritual, and that from their perspective, from the elite's perspective here, you will understand what the goal of that ritual was in terms of either selecting someone out of humanity or trying to get someone through their process, through the metempsychoses and all of that kind of thing. Just because there's all of this technology stuff that these guys use that is not used by these other people over here in the naturals. Anyway, live long and prosper. It's cold. I got to go get some food, and there's people showing up to do stuff.